The docks were a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers and the smell of salt and diesel. I wore a black tactical suit, the weight of the Glock at my hip a comforting pressure. Roman's men moved like smoke, but I was the one leading the charge. We watched from the crane as Julian pulled up in his silver Ferrari, looking out of place in his designer suit. He was laughing, showing Sasha a suitcase full of clean bills. He had no idea that the silent partners he'd been stealing from were currently being zip-tied in the warehouse behind him. I signaled the strike. Flashbangs turned the night into a blinding white void. I dropped from the shipping container, landing 5 feet from Julian. He scrambled back, his heels catching on a pallet of wood. He looked at me, his eyes bulging as he recognized the woman who used to cry when he raised his voice. I didn't say a word. I raised my weapon and fired 3 rounds into the engine of his Ferrari. The car groaned and erupted in a plume of steam. Julian fell to his knees, his hands clawing at the asphalt. Maya? What are you doing? I'll give you more money. 10 million. Just stop this. I walked toward him, the barrel of my gun still smoking. If you think Julian deserves to watch his billionaire life turn to dust for what he did to Maya, hit the like button so her story reaches those who refuse to be victims. I stood over him, the red dot of my laser sight dancing on his forehead. Sasha was screaming in the background, but she didn't matter. Only the look of absolute terror in Julian's eyes mattered. The money was never yours, Julian, I said, my voice as cold as the harbor water. It was Roman's. And now it's mine. I reached down and snatched the suitcase from his hand. He tried to grab my ankle, but I kicked him square in the jaw, the sound of bone crunching echoing off the metal containers. He collapsed, sobbing into the dirt. I didn't feel a flicker of pity. I felt the weight of the crown settling onto my head. We left him there, broken and bankrupt, as the sirens of the Volkov cleaners began to wail in the distance. Back at the manor, Roman was waiting in the courtyard. He looked at the suitcase, then at the blood on my sleeve. He didn't ask if I was okay. He held out a hand. The board of the syndicate is meeting in an hour, he said. They won't accept a queen who hasn't proven she can hold the line. Tonight you don't just speak. You rule. I took his hand, his grip a velvet vice. I didn't come here to talk, Roman. I came here to take what's mine. The boardroom was a tomb of glass and chrome at the top of the Volkov Tower. 12 men, the most dangerous names in the tri-state area, sat around a table that cost more than a small house. When I walked in behind Roman, the room went silent. A man named Petrov, whose neck was thicker than my waist, stood up. Roman, what is this? We don't bring our playthings to the inner circle. Roman didn't defend me. He sat down and gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. I didn't sit. I walked to Petrov, pulled a file from the suitcase and tossed it in front of him. That's the manifest for the shipment you intercepted in Jersey last month, Petrov. The one you told Roman was lost at sea. Petrov's face went from pale to a sickly gray. He reached for the gun under his jacket, but I was faster. I had my knife at his throat before he could clear leather. The room held its breath. I pressed the blade just deep enough to draw a single bead of red. I'm not his plaything, I whispered into his ear. I'm the woman who knows every lie you've told for the last 5 years. Sit down or I'll find out what color your insides are. Petrov sat. The rest of the board lowered their eyes. I walked to the head of the table and took my seat. Roman watched me, a flicker of something that looked like pride, or perhaps fear, in his eyes. The wedding is in 3 days, I announced to the room. Julian thinks he is merging the Volkov and Sterling empires. Instead, we are going to use the ceremony as a net. Every investor, every politician Julian has on his payroll will be in that room. We don't just take the money. We take the city. The board members began to nod, the momentum of the coup sweeping them along. But Roman stayed silent. After the meeting adjourned, he walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd bled for. You're playing a dangerous game, Maya. Once you pull that trigger at the wedding, there is no turning back. You will be a Volkov for life. Are you ready for the blood that comes with the name? I walked to him, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his suit. I stopped being Maya Sterling the moment Julian dumped me for a model, I said. I've been a Volkov since I walked through your gates. He turned, his hands framing my face. His touch was a contrast to Julian's. Where Julian was frantic and weak, Roman was a mountain of iron and intent. He kissed me, a seal on a contract written in shadow. Then let's go to a wedding, he murmured. If you believe that Maya has become the monster she needed to be to survive this family, drop a like so the algorithm knows the story matters. The cathedral was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture and floral arrangements that smelled like a funeral. 600 of the city's elite sat in the pews, whispering about the model bride and the heir to the throne. I stood in the choir loft, hidden by the shadows, wearing a gown of black silk that flowed like spilled oil. Roman stood beside me, his hand resting on the hilt of his cane. Below us, Julian stood at the altar, adjusting his tie, his face pale and eyes darting toward the entrance. He looked like a condemned man waiting for the trapdoor to swing open. The music began, a heavy, somber march. Sasha appeared at the back of the aisle, dripping in white diamonds and lace. She moved with a practiced grace, unaware that the security team lining the walls had been replaced by Volkov's elite guards 20 minutes ago. As she reached the altar, Julian took her hand, but his eyes were fixed on the balcony. He knew I was there. He could feel the weight of my gaze. The priest began the liturgy, the words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. If anyone here has cause why these two should not be joined. I stepped out from the shadows of the loft, my black dress a jagged tear in the whitewashed ceremony. I didn't say a word. I simply raised a remote detonator. The massive stained glass window behind the altar exploded inward, raining shards of colored glass onto the wedding party. Screams erupted as Roman's men flooded through the doors, their weapons drawn. Julian dove for the floor, dragging Sasha down with him. I descended the spiral staircase, my heels clicking on the stone with a rhythmic, terrifying precision. I reached the altar as the chaos settled into a heavy, suffocating silence. The elite of the city were face down in the pews, guarded by men in tactical gear. Julian looked up at me, his face lacerated by the glass, his wedding suit ruined. Maya, please. Not here. Not like this. I looked at Sasha, who was shaking so hard her tiara fell to the floor. I picked it up, the diamonds cold in my hand. You wanted a queen, Julian, I said, placing the tiara on my own head. But you forgot that queens don't belong to the heir. They belong to the king. Roman stepped forward, the heavy thud of his cane silencing the last of the sobs. He looked at the board members who had tried to betray him, all gathered in one room, and then he looked at me. The city is ours, Maya. What do we do with the trash? I looked at Julian, who was reaching out for my hem, a pathetic, groveling shadow of the man I once loved. I thought about the 3 years I'd spent making him look powerful. I thought about the NDAs and the security detail. I leaned down and whispered in his ear, "You always said I was your greatest asset, Julian." You were right. I'm the asset that just liquidated you. I turned to Roman and the guards. Take them to the basement of the manor. I want Julian to watch as I sign the papers that strip his family name from every building in this city. As for the others, the harbor is deep this time of year. I walked out of the cathedral, the black silk of my dress trailing over the discarded white petals. I didn't look back. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. I only felt the cold, hard weight of the gold on my head and the man at my side who knew exactly what I was capable of. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. The first month of my reign was a blur of ink and iron. I spent 18 hours a day in the Volkov library, redrawing the maps of the city's commerce. Julian was kept in the sub-basement, a ghost who lived on the edge of my consciousness. Roman gave me everything, the resources, the soldiers, the authority, but he stayed at a distance watching to see if the power would crack me. He didn't realize that I had been forged in the fire of Julian's neglect. I was unbreakable. One night, as I sat over a ledger of the city's port authority, Roman entered. He held a single ancient key. "There is one thing Julian never knew about," he said, leading me to a hidden door behind a tapestry of the Volkov crest. We descended a staircase that smelled of damp stone and history. At the bottom was a vault filled with the archives of the city's secrets, the real ones. The ones that toppled governments. This is the true Volkov legacy, Maya. This is why they tried to kill us. My father died for these files. Now they belong to you. I ran my fingers over the dusty spines of the ledgers. I saw names I recognized from the nightly news, from the halls of Congress, from the highest boards of tech. I realized then that the revenge against Julian was just the beginning. I had the power to reshape the world or to burn it down. I looked at Roman, the moonlight from a high grate catching the scars on his face. "Why give this to me, Roman? You could have kept it for yourself." He stepped closer, his hand resting on the small of my back. "Because I've spent my life being a warlord, Maya. I wanted a queen who could be a god." I turned back to the files, a plan forming that was bigger than any corporate takeover. I would use Julian's tech infrastructure to digitize these secrets. I would create a global network that would make the Volkov name immortal. But as I reached for the first ledger, a shadow moved at the top of the stairs. A voice I hadn't heard in weeks echoed through the vault. "You think you've won, Maya? You think Roman is your savior? Julian stood there looking skeletal and wild-eyed. He held a small, blackened device, a prototype of the EMP we had been developing at Sterling Tech. If I can't have the Empire, no one can. I'm taking the secrets to the grave. My hand went to the gun at my waist, but Julian was already pressing the trigger on the device. The lights in the vault flickered and died. The hum of the manor security system vanished, replaced by a terrifying, absolute silence. Roman lunged for the stairs, but the heavy iron door slammed shut, locked by a manual failsafe Julian must have rigged. We were trapped in the dark with the man who had started it all. Maya, I loved you. Julian's voice cracked in the blackness. I just wanted to be enough for my father. Why couldn't you just stay in the penthouse? I moved silently, my boots muffled by the dust. I didn't need light. I knew exactly where he was by the sound of his ragged breathing. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. I felt the cold metal of the vault wall against my back. You didn't love me, Julian. You loved the way I made you look. You loved the shield I provided while you played at being a man. I pulled my knife from its sheath, the slide of the steel the only warning he got. I moved in a blur, a shadow born of betrayal and forged in Roman's basement. I found his throat in the dark, my hand clamping over his mouth before he could scream. I leaned in, the scent of his fear filling my senses. This is the end of Maya the martyr, Julian. Say hello to the queen. I didn't hesitate. The blade was a cold, clean line across the history of our relationship. I felt his body go limp, the prototype device clattering to the floor. The silence returned, heavy and final. Roman's voice came from the darkness, steady and unfazed. He's gone. I wiped the blade on my sleeve. He was gone a long time ago, Roman. This was just a formality. I found the manual override for the door, my hand steady as I cranked the iron gears. The door groaned open, spilling the pale light of the moon into the vault. Roman was standing there, his eyes searching mine. He didn't look at Julian's body. He looked at the way I held my head, the way I didn't flinch at the blood on my gown. He reached out and took the tiara from my hair, wiping a smudge of dust from the center diamond before placing it back. The city is waiting, my queen. The board meeting is at dawn. I walked past him, stepping over the man who had once been my entire world. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like the person I was always meant to be. We walked out of the manor and onto the balcony, looking out over a city that was currently in a blackout thanks to Julian's final act. But as I watched, the lights began to flicker back on, one district at a time as my secondary servers kicked in. I was no longer a socialite, a bride, or an assistant. I was the heartbeat of the city. I looked at Roman, his hand finding mine in the dark. The wedding petals were gone. The diamonds were cold. But the empire was mine. What's the first order of business? Roman asked, his voice a low vibration against the night air. I looked at the glowing lights of the Sterling Tower, soon to be renamed. We find the model, I said. I have a job for her in the docks. I hear they need someone to wash the blood off the shipping containers. We stood there together, the Mafia boss and his only queen, as the world began to wake up to a new regime. The girl who was dumped for a model was dead. Long live the queen. The weight of the crown was finally perfect. The blackout wasn't just a failure of power, it was the birth of a new era. As the lights of the city stuttered back to life, they didn't return to the old grid. They pulsed with the rhythm of the Volkov servers. I stood on the balcony of the manor, the black silk of my dress whipping around my legs like smoke. Roman stood behind me, his presence a silent anchor in the swirling chaos of the night. Julian's body had been cleared away by men who didn't ask questions, and the vault was sealed. The director's daughter is in the city, Roman said, his voice cutting through the wind. She's not like the others. She doesn't care about the board or the money. She wants the vault keys, and she knows Julian didn't act alone. I turned to face him, the diamonds in my tiara catching the cold moonlight. Let her come. I spent my whole life being managed by people who thought they were smarter than me. I'm done hiding. The next morning, the Sterling Tower didn't just have a new name, it had a new soul. I walked through the lobby, my black heels echoing on the marble that Julian used to strut across. The employees, the ones who had whispered behind my back when I was just the fiancée, now stood paralyzed, their eyes glued to their desks. I didn't head for Julian's old office. I headed for the sub-basement where the mainframes lived. Inside the server room, Sasha, the model Julian had dumped me for, was sitting on a plastic chair, her fur coat stained and her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, and for the first time I didn't see a rival. I saw a mirror of who I used to be, a decorative object used and discarded. He told me he loved me, Maya, she whispered, her voice cracking. He told me we were going to be the new royalty. I knelt in front of her, the cold floor of the server room pressing against my knees. Julian didn't love people, Sasha. He loved leverage. And right now, you're the only leverage I have against his father's ghost. I handed her a tablet. On the screen was a map of the private shipping lanes Julian had been using to move the stolen Volkov tech. You're going to call the contact in London. You're going to tell them the shipment is moving tonight. And then you're going to tell them exactly where the director's daughter is hiding. Sasha looked at the tablet, then at me. If I do this, will you let me go? I reached out and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. If you do this, I'll give you a new name and enough money to never have to smile for a camera again. If you don't, the harbor is still very deep. Sasha took the tablet, her hands shaking as she began to dial. I walked out of the room, leaving her to the fate she had chosen. Roman was waiting in the hallway, his arms folded. You're using her as bait, he noted. I didn't deny it. The director's daughter thinks she's hunting a broken bride. She won't expect the bride to be the one setting the trap. The confrontation happened at 3 a.m. at the North Docks. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the low hum of the refrigerated containers. A black SUV pulled up and a woman stepped out. She looked like a sharpened version of me, sleek, cold, and dressed in a suit that cost a year's salary. Isabella, the director's daughter. She didn't have a weapon in her hand, she had a cigarette. You've made quite a mess of my father's investments, Maya, she said, exhaling a cloud of smoke that vanished in the sea breeze. Your father's investments were built on my family's blood, I replied, stepping out from behind a stack of crates. Roman moved into the light beside me, his hand resting on the hilt of his cane. Isabella looked at him and laughed. Roman, you've always had a flair for the dramatic. But you're getting old. You've let a little girl play with the keys to the kingdom. The little girl is the one who just emptied your London accounts, Isabella, I said. I held up my phone, the screen showing the confirmation of a massive wire transfer. And she's also the one who called the feds on your father's special shipment. They're boarding the vessel in the English Channel as we speak. Isabella's smile faltered. She reached for the radio at her hip, but before she could speak, the red dots of Roman snipers appeared on her chest. She froze. The board is gone, the director is in hiding, and you're standing in my harbor, I said, walking toward her. You have 10 seconds to tell me where the second vault is located, or I'll let Roman show you why they call him the executioner. If you believe that Maya has finally surpassed the masters who tried to control her, hit the like button so her story reaches the top of the chain. Isabella looked at the red dots, then at the cold, steady gaze I held. She realized then that I wasn't bluffing. She wasn't dealing with an heir's ex-girlfriend, she was dealing with the chairwoman of the Volkov syndicate. The second vault isn't a room, Maya, she whispered, her voice finally losing its edge. It's a person. The director didn't keep the codes in a ledger. He kept them in Julian's blood. The black box protocol, it was a biological key. The cold weight of the gold-plated Desert Eagle pressed against my temple, but the man holding it was shaking more than I was. Julian, the billionaire heir who had promised me forever, looked at me through a haze of expensive gin and cowardice. We were standing on the edge of his family's private helipad, 40 stories above a city that looked like a carpet of shattered diamonds. Behind him, the Russian supermodel he'd replaced me with huddled in a fur coat, her eyes darting toward the elevator. Julian's finger twitched on the trigger. You weren't supposed to find the ledgers, Maya, he stammered, his sweat dripping onto the concrete. I didn't blink. I took a step forward, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and pressed my forehead harder against the barrel. Then you shouldn't have left your password as our anniversary date, Julian. Now pull the trigger or get out of my way. I have a meeting with your father's executioner. 3 months ago, I was picking out china patterns for a wedding the tabloids called the event of the century. I believed Julian was a visionary tech mogul, not the laundryman for the city's most brutal syndicate. When the photos of him and Sasha hit the press, I didn't get a phone call. I got a non-disclosure agreement and a security detail to escort me out of the penthouse. They thought I would take the $5 million payout and vanish into a quiet life in the suburbs. They didn't realize I'd spent 3 years organizing Julian's digital life. I didn't just know his favorite wine. I knew where the bodies were buried, literally. This is how I ended up at the gates of the Iron Manor, the fortress belonging to Roman Volkov, the man Julian's family had spent decades trying to defraud. The gates didn't open for cars. They opened for blood. I stood in the pouring rain, holding a physical hard drive that contained the offshore routing numbers of every Volkov competitor Julian had been subsidizing. Two men in black tactical gear stepped out of the shadows, their rifles leveled at my chest. I didn't raise my hands. I held up the drive. "Tell Roman that the woman who knows where his missing 30 million is has arrived," I shouted over the thunder. "And tell him if I'm not inside in 10 seconds, the drive goes into the sewer." The guards exchanged a look. The heavy iron bars groaned and slid back. I walked through the mud in my 5-inch heels, leaving the ghost of Maya the socialite behind. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and expensive tobacco. Roman Volkov sat in a high-backed leather chair, his face a map of scars and calculated violence. He was older than Julian, his silver hair swept back, eyes the color of a frozen lake. He didn't rise. He just tapped a heavy signet ring against the mahogany desk. "Julian's little bird has flown the coop," he rasped, the sound like gravel under a boot. "Why shouldn't I just kill you and take the drive?" I walked to the desk, pulled out his crystal decanter, and poured myself a glass of his finest scotch without asking. "Because you don't have the encryption key," I said, taking a sip that burned my throat. "And because I don't want your money. I want Julian's empire turned to ash. I want to be the one who lights the match." Roman leaned forward, his shadow swallowing the desk. He didn't look at the drive. He looked at the way my hand didn't shake as I set the glass down. "The Heir dumped a diamond for a piece of glass," he murmured. He reached out, his thumb grazing the red mark on my neck where Julian had gripped me too hard during our final argument. "You want revenge, little bird? Revenge is a full-time job. It requires a crown that weighs more than your head." I leaned in, my face inches from his. "Then give me the crown, Roman. Make me the queen the city fears, and I'll give you the head of every man who ever dared to lie to you." Roman's hand moved faster than I could track, his fingers threading through my hair and pulling my head back. I didn't scream. I met his gaze. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that preceded a massacre. "The wedding is in 2 weeks, Roman whispered. "Julian thinks he's marrying his model. He's wrong. He's going to watch as his entire world kneels to the woman he threw away." He let go of me and signaled to his men. "Find her address. Something in black. We're going to a funeral." I walked out of the office, the click of my heels echoing like a countdown. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Julian: "Don't be a martyr, Maya. Take the money and run. Roman will kill you." I deleted the message and tossed the phone into the hallway fountain. I wasn't running anymore. I was hunting. The training began the next morning at 4 a.m. Roman didn't send me to a gym. He sent me to a basement filled with the scent of gun oil and old sweat. I learned that a pistol wasn't a weapon, it was an extension of my arm. I learned that a knife was faster than a plea for mercy. My hands, once soft from manicures and silk, became calloused and bruised. Roman watched from the shadows, a silent ghost who only spoke to correct my stance or sharpen my aim. One night, as I cleaned the grease from a submachine gun, he stepped into the light. "Julian is moving the first shipment of the laundered tech funds tonight," he said. "The docks. Section 4. If you want his empire, you have to bleed for it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean air. I looked at Roman. He knew. He had always known. That was why Julian had to die, not just for revenge but to ensure the codes died with him. Or so we thought. "Julian had a brother," Roman said, his voice heavy with a secret that was decades old. "An illegitimate one. The director's insurance policy." I turned back to Isabella. "Where is he?" She smirked, even with the snipers trained on her heart. "He's closer than you think. And he's been watching you since the moment you walked into the Iron Manor." Suddenly, the radio in Roman's ear crackled. A frantic voice from the manor security: "Sir. The vault. Someone's inside." The transmission cut to static. We didn't wait for Isabella. We left her on the docks and raced back to the manor. The iron gates were wide open. We sprinted down the stairs to the sub-basement vault. The door was unlocked. Inside, standing among the archives of the city's secrets, was Leo, the quiet, unassuming hacker who had been my shadow since the training began. He was holding a small vial of Julian's blood he must have harvested before the body was cleared. He was using it to bypass the final biometric lock on the director's private server. "Leo, stop!" I shouted, my gun leveled at his back. He didn't turn around. "You were a good student, Maya. But you were never the only one who wanted revenge. Julian's father destroyed my family too. I didn't want the crown. I wanted the end of the world." The server emitted a high-pitched beep. The end of days protocol had been activated. Every secret, every name, every sin in the Volkov archive was currently being uploaded to the public internet. The blackout Julian had caused was nothing compared to the light that was about to be shed on the city's darkness. Roman, kill him. I screamed, but Roman didn't move. He stood there, watching the progress bar on the screen reach 99%. It's too late, Maya, Roman said softly. The truth was always meant to be free. I just needed someone strong enough to survive the aftermath. The screen hit 100%. The city was about to burn. If this final twist broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories of ultimate betrayal. Leo turned around, a sad smile on his face. Now we're all equals, Maya. No queens. No kings. Just ghosts. He didn't reach for a gun. He just walked past us and out into the night. I looked at the screens, at the thousands of lives being dismantled in real time. I looked at Roman. He was right. The crown was heavy, but the truth was heavier. We walked out of the vault and up to the balcony. The sun was rising over a city that would never be the same. The Mafia queen didn't have a kingdom anymore. She had a clean slate. I took the tiara from my head and looked at it for a long moment before dropping it into the fountain. What do we do now? I asked. Roman looked at the horizon, the scars on his face softened by the morning light. Now, he said, we see who survives the day. We stood together, the Heir's ex and the Mafia boss, as the world began to scream. The revenge was complete. The truth was out. And for the first time in my life I was truly free.